Hello horse racing fans and welcome back to another video, and you might be wondering, why are we doing this again? Well, it's because this time it's not exactly going to be my tier list. This time it's going to be more focused on my partner here, Jack Sargent, who you may know better as the Racing Rundown. He makes his own videos, has his own podcast. He's a great guy, and actually kind of the reason why I started making horse racing videos myself. So it's great to have him actually in a collaboration video on my channel for once. I can't believe this is the first time. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm very glad to come on here. I certainly have big opinions about the Breeders' Cup Classic. I love talking about old stuff like this, and I am hoping to be able to add more of my viewpoint and a varied viewpoint from what Nathan and Sammy did in the other video on Nathan's channel. So looking at the way that they did, I know very quickly off the bat we'll get into some differing opinions, and you'll hear some of my strong opinions about horses that I think people generally have a fond view of.
That's kind of the main reason why I wanted to do this, because I knew Jack would have something new to say to this. I do apologize for having two different tier list videos in a row, but I promise this will be the last one for this race, the Breeders' Cup, and we'll have some more unique ones down the road. For now, let's not waste any time because we got a lot to go through. Let's start with the original, Wild Again, which I know you're definitely going to introduce your strong opinions right from the start.
Well, I guess I'll just say this one thing. I mean, Wild Again, for me, is a C tier Breeders' Cup Classic horse, and there's certainly an argument to be made for him to be a B tier horse, and it's obvious that he ran really well front running in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and he beat two very nice horses in that stretch duel that made the first Breeders' Cup Classic so memorable. But outside of that, he had the Grade 1 win in the Meadowlands Cup, but he really did not do a whole lot in the year 1984. He had some various other graded stakes wins, a couple of wins in New Orleans, and he also won the Oakland Handicap, and he had some allowance wins from here to there, but generally a very inconsistent horse. He did lose to some good competition in 1984. One of them was when he was third in Suburban behind the most recent to-date horse and the last horse to win the New York Handicap Triple Crown, which was the Met Mile, the Suburban, and the Brooklyn Stakes. Those not necessarily in the order that I listed them as, but those are the three races. And Fit to Fight is the most recent and last horse who will win all three of those races in the same year. But getting into his specific Breeders' Cup Classic. So this race, as I'm sure some viewers might know, was the only to-date Breeders' Cup Classic that has had a major disqualification in it. What I mean by major disqualification is horse taken down from an on-the-board position, placed in a different position. And that horse that was taken down ended up being Gate Dancer after a very, very rough stretch run. But it's my opinion, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this opinion. There are other people who have seen the head-on replay for this race that believe that the wrong horse came down in this race, and I believe that Wild Again should have come down in this 1984 Classic, and that certainly does hurt his ranking, in my opinion, because if he is not being a bowling ball to Slew of Gold in that Breeders' Cup Classic, then I think we're talking about Slew of Gold that won the Breeders' Cup Classic, and we're not even having the conversation about Wild Again. So, inconsistent campaign. When he was on his best day, he was a very good racehorse, but he was very inconsistent, and the fact that he also got involved in that big stretch beef with Slew of Gold, Gate Dancer, and obviously himself, that hurts him in my viewpoint. So C tier horse for me, should have come down in the Classic. Gate Dancer, he should have been the 1984 Classic winner, but realistically, everybody knows Slew of Gold was the best horse in the race. But all that aside, Wild Again C tier for me.
Alright, now on to Proud Truth. Proud Truth, you already knew that I brought a little bit of attention to him and put him in B tier in my original video thanks to his very light hiatus of only 8 days before winning the Classic over the aforementioned scapegoat Gate Dancer. But Jack, what do you think of Proud Truth?
Yeah, and you got to feel for Jack Vanberg, a guy who would run second in 3 of 4 Breeders' Cup Classics, all of them by a nose margin or less. This was one of them where Jack Vanberg was beaten by a tough horse, but Proud Truth is a horse that no one really talks about. It's understandable because his career was not the most impressive, but if you look at the early part of his 3-year-old campaign, he was really one of those top horses going into the 1985 Kentucky Derby. If you know me, you know I'm a big spend-a-buck person. None of them had a chance to win that 85 Derby, but his resume before that Fountain of Youth, Florida Derby, and then after that, he won the Peter Pan, which at the time was a Grade 1. I believe there were only 3 runnings of the Peter Pan that it was a Grade 1. That was one of them, so he won the Grade 1 Peter Pan, and then had a hiatus over the summer, didn't race in any of the big races for 3-year-olds, Jim, Danny, Travers alike, won an allowance race, won the Discovery handicap, or that race was a handicap at the time, and then obviously had his big score in the Classic. So the big ranking for me, and I had talked to Nathan about his list, and I said Proud Truth has to be a B tier horse because of the fact that he won the Classic on such quick a turnaround, and those were some pretty good horses in there. Other horses besides the aforementioned Gate Dancer that were good that were in there were the not 3-year-old champion, but probably the best consistent 3-year-old Chiefs Crown, and then also Van Landingham, who was a top older horse in 1985.
Yeah, and like keep in mind the Chiefs Crown is also a Breeders' Cup winner in his own right. Like even if you exclude his 3-year-old season, he was a champion 2-year-old against Spendabuck. He did beat Spendabuck in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. You can always talk about the trip or whatever, but Chiefs Crown did beat the eventual champion 3-year-old Spendabuck. That kind of rounds out Proud Truth's career, a underappreciated horse who certainly did things that no other Breeders' Cup Classic winner will ever do. I think he's kind of the Conquistador Cielo of the Breeders' Cup. Of course, it's not as impressive as winning the Met and the Belmont, but you get the idea. Skywalker, not so impressive.
Yeah, Skywalker was a horse that was carried by Lafitte Pinkai to his major victories. The Santa Anita Derby, Gary Stevens has talked about that race before. He kind of fell asleep at the wheel there. That's how Skywalker got that race. And Skywalker was able to steal the 1986 Classic on the lead. The 2 top horses in that year, Precisionist and Turcoman. Precisionist didn't get a good start out of the gate, and Turcoman just got going too late. And basically, Pinkai stole the race on the lead with Skywalker. And outside of his 2 victories, which were absolutely Lafitte Pinkai's doing, not really much else to say about Skywalker. He's a D tier horse. There's only 2 horses that I am going to say right off the bat. I agree with the placement of the E tier horses, so Skywalker's going to be a D tier.
Okay, now this is another one of the ones that you definitely are very opinionated on and differ from me. Ferdinand. We had him in B tier in the last video, but he's going to be a little less kindly placed this time.
Yeah, I'm going to put Ferdinand in C tier, and it's very easy to look at his Classic and say, because that was an awesome race, and, race calls for the Breeders' Cup Classic have kind of influenced how people think of certain Breeders' Cups, and I understand that because this is a classic call, one of Tom Durkin's finest in his many years of calling races, and I certainly agree that it was a great call, it was a great stretch run, but Ferdinand was not the greatest older horse by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he was very inconsistent throughout the early part of 1987. He had some nice races against Broadbrush, but Broadbrush was tending to come out in front in those races, and it really wasn't until the Hollywood Gold Cup where he had his big shining achievement, first big one since the Kentucky Derby, and then, kind of got lighter competition going into the Breeders' Cup Classic. That Breeders' Cup Classic field could have been a lot better than it ended up being. The best horse in 1987 was Java Gold, who was a very nice 3-year-old owned by Paul Mellon's Rokeby Stables. He was the Travers winner. He beat one of the better Travers fields that's ever been assembled. The horses from 1987 were lucky that Java Gold wasn't there. So I would rank Ferdinand in C tier because I'm not a huge fan of the campaign that he had. His one Grade 1 before the Classic wasn't against the greatest group of horses, and sure, it's a classic Breeders' Cup. It's one of the most iconic and one that everybody likes, but beating Alysheba, who we'll get to in just a minute, was certainly a great accomplishment, but it's not enough for me to float Ferdinand higher than C tier.
And another thing is that the following year, Alysheba got his revenge, like, multiple times, with Ferdinand regularly finishing behind Alysheba in a lot of the California races following the Breeders' Cup Classic. It's a good case of losing the battle but winning the war for Alysheba, since he lost the Classic but was overall just a better horse than Ferdinand. And I think that's a good transition to talk about Alysheba, who in our last video, he was the first S-tier horse, and it's not changing.
Yeah, he's my first S-tier horse. I'm sure it's very easy to understand why. As a 4-year-old, he was just nasty to go up against. And 1988 had a year of some very, very good horses. Obviously, later in the year, in some of the handicap races in New York, he went up against 49er, who was the best 3-year-old in 1988, was able to run back his rivalry with Bet Twice and the Philip Island. That was a very memorable race, and had his string of success in California in some of their Grade 1 races in the earlier part of the year. And then the thing that really cements him in S tier was against a fabulous 1988 Breeders' Cup Classic field. In the mud at Churchill Downs, he was not getting over the track. If you go and look at the times from that 1988 Breeders' Cup, they're all consistently among the slowest for that Breeders' Cup. And Alysheba does have the slowest Breeders' Cup Classic, but that does not hurt his rank at all because he was not getting over the track. And, you know, there were horses that if Alysheba was not as good as he was, lesser talented than he was in reality, he would have gotten caught by Seeking the Gold there. But because he was as good as he is, Alysheba's a Breeders' Cup Classic winner. Even though he wasn't handling the track, he just had the class to be able to win the race.
I'll be honest, it looked like Seeking the Gold actually had the race at some segments of it. And I think a good example of what could have been is 49er. 49er is a great horse. Like, as you mentioned, he was like the best 3-year-old that year, excluding Risen Star. And
he was better than Risen Star. Risen Star got the Eclipse Award because Risen Star won the Triple Crown races. This isn't a time to debate that, but 49er was the better horse.
Yeah, that aside, 49er is a great horse, but just like Alysheba, he did not handle the surface very well, and it ended up, he finished like, what, did he finish 4th? He didn't.
Yes, he finished 4th.
Yeah, he didn't finish so great. Even a great horse can be severely handicapped by a bad surface, but Alysheba somehow rose above that, even when a horse like 49er had that legitimate excuse. So I think that further validates him. And like what I said in the last video, the slow time kind of speaks more volumes to what he was up against. And with that, we then go on to Sunday Silence, who we put in A tier last time. I personally like Sunday Silence. I know Jack is a little more of an easygoer fan last time I checked, but I'll always have a soft spot for Sunday Silence.
It's not that I prefer one horse to the other. I just have a tremendous amount of respect for what Easygoer did in the remainder of his 3-year-old campaign post-Belmont. It's something that will never be equaled again by any horse, but absolutely Sunday Silence was the better of the two on the racetrack. They met 4 times, Sunday Silence won 3 times. You're not going to hear me say that Easygoer was the better horse than Sunday Silence in their 4 races, because I think that's ridiculous. The math bears it out, and you know, because of the fact that he had the race against Easygoer in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and you know, the other thing that I want to bring up is, and I'm going to be talking about a lot of the other horses that Breeders' Cup Classic runners were going up against. Blushing John was a very crack older horse in 1989, and for Sunday Silence to be able to hold off him, and Easygoer does carry a lot of weight in my mind, so he's going to be in A tier for me. I'm going to hold him out of S just because I'm a little bit more conservative with S tier. You could certainly put him in S tier just because of the fact that he did beat Easygoer in this race in 3 out of 4 times that year, but I would say he's in A tier just because I don't think he's quite S tier level.
Yeah, probably like A+. I don't know if I said that in the last one, but he's definitely A+ here. Unbridled, I think he's now the 4th horse to do the Kentucky Derby and Breeders' Cup Classic double. We put him in around B tier, but it was more like B-. How does he fare?
Yeah, so in the 1980s, there was a funny string of the 4 years from 1987 until 1990 were all won by Kentucky Derby winners. And in the last 2 years, there were 3-year-olds who took out the Breeders' Cup Classic in their year, the same year they won the Kentucky Derby. And note, that will not happen again until, I believe, American Pharoah. So it's not all that common for the Kentucky Derby winner to win the Breeders' Cup Classic in the same year. And that was certainly an accomplishment for Unbridled. But, you know, Unbridled, another horse that gets a lot of fanfare because of the story that goes around him. And absolutely, it's a great story with Unbridled, his trainer, the moment that Carl Nasker had with the owner in the Kentucky Derby. Unbridled also gets a lot of credit, in my opinion, for the ride that Pat Day put on him. I think it's one of the best in the history of the Breeders' Cup Classic, with how tight the quarters were with him on the rail. He also had the 14 post, so 14 post at Belmont Park is never an easy thing to navigate. And Pat Day stuck on the inside, and he had 2 choices to make mid-stretch. He could either try to split horses and go between 36 Red, who was leading, in the European horse Ibn Bay, or he could have checked up, switched outside, and try to go around Ibn Bay. Fortunately, he made the right decision and fought through, waited to split horses, did, and won the race. But I think his Breeders' Cup Classic win, while impressive, was very much Pat Day oriented and not so much Unbridled oriented. So Unbridled is also a B horse for me. I would agree with them. He's probably lower tier B. On his best day, Unbridled was a very good horse, but I just don't think that his record bears out any more than B. Obviously, winning the Derby and the Breeders' Cup Classic and being second in 3 other Grade 1s that year does give him a strong resume, but there are Breeders' Cup Classic winners that have much better resumes.
Honestly, I think one race that not many people talk about is the Deputy Minister, which I believe was about 7 furlongs, but like just the way that he was able to make up so much ground in a sprint race, I thought that was rather impressive. Like just an underappreciated performance. But that's just a sidetrack thing. I think he's about B-. And then the horse who beat him the following year, Black Tie Affair, I have a lot of nice things to say about him. But what about you?
Yeah, Black Tie Affair had a very, very good campaign in 1991. Former sprinter was Black Tie Affair. And, I guess you could kind of draw similarities to Knicks Go to a certain extent. But Black Tie Affair going into the 1991 Classic was in I'm going to say this about a lot of Classic fields. He was in a very good Classic field. There aren't many bad Classic fields, obviously, because it's the biggest race of the year and all the best horses show up for it. So it's going to be very, very rare where you're going to have a bad group of Classic horses. But I'm putting that out there just because I don't want to keep sounding like a broken record. But Black Tie Affair won 6 straight races in 1991, and only one of them was a Grade 1, and that was the Philip Island at Monmouth, and he didn't really run against any of the top performers in 1991, but that didn't really matter because the one time he did on the biggest stage, he was able to go out there, masterful front-running ride by Jerry Bailey there with him, and able to set his own pace, give himself a breather, and when they came into the stretch, he was able to hold on, win by just over a length, and once again, over a very, very nice group of older horses. He was lucky that a horse who, I'm not sure how many people have heard about him, but In Excess, who was the best handicap horse in New York in 1991, oddly chose the Breeders' Cup Mile as his Breeders' Cup prep instead of the Breeders' Cup Classic. So certainly was helped by In Excess not being there. Had In Excess been there, maybe we're talking about a different story, but I'm not going to take that away from him because it was certainly a great ride by Jerry Bailey and great ride by the horse, front running, and like I said, the group he went up against was a very strong group in its own right.
That about sums it up, but does that put him in B tier, or would you say he's A tier?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to. I got too caught up in talking about how good the field he went up against. He's an A tier horse, absolutely.
A tier. He was B tier last time, but yeah, he sneaks right in. I made you can make the case for either. I think this was the second S tier horse that we had. A.P. Indy. Does he stay there, or do you think he goes down?
No, A.P. Indy absolutely stays there. I mean, you look at his campaign as a 2-year-old going up into the Triple Crown. Absolute tragedy that we did not get to see him run in the 1992 Kentucky Derby. And, there are a lot of could-have-beens from that, but I think even with Arazi, if he has a start on dirt before the 1992 Kentucky Derby, and I've been one to say if Arazi has a start on dirt prior to the 1992 Derby, he wins that. But if we're talking about A.P. Indy there, I don't think it's as clear-cut with Arazi there. But his run in the Belmont Stakes was tremendous. Unfortunately, missed a lot of the later year 3-year-old races. His 2 races going into the Breeders' Cup were defeats. But the Jockey Club Gold Cup effort, where he had a god-awful start, had his shoe ripped out, and was, basically should not have ran as well there as he did. And if you go back and you watch the race, you can hear in Tom Durkin's call, he describes it as a miraculous run from well back. And it looked like for a moment A.P. Indy was going to make a run and win the race. Ultimately, he flattened out because he was running with the very bad effects of having lost his shoe at the start of the race. But the point being is that was incredible, and then his run in the Breeders' Cup Classic against the best older horse in America that year, Pleasant Tap, was great. One thing that I always like to bring up about that race, because it's a cool touch, is the horse that finished third was a very nice English 3-year-old filly named Jalifa. And to date, Jalifa is the only 3-year-old filly to have ever run in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and she ran third there. So a horse who had no business running as well as she did, ran very well behind the 2 best Americans, but absolutely A.P. Indy's an S-tier horse, and maybe that's because of the whole campaign, but I don't know how many people are going to argue with that, because he was the best horse in 1992, and it's a shame we didn't get to see him for more of the bigger races.
Yeah, that about summarizes it. I actually quickly took a look at the replay. He got sandwiched. That was pretty rough. Poor guy. Arcangues on the other side of the spectrum, instead of the big favorite that everyone was in love with, the big surprise, 133 to 1. In the last video, he was put at D tier alongside the other European Breeders' Cup Classic winner Ravens Pass, which will come way later, but I don't know if you're going to be any more favorable towards him.
I mean, if I were to rank this race myself, I would create a separate column for horses from Europe that it's hard to rank them because they were good European horses, but were they the best horses in America compared to top American horses? I don't think it's entirely fair to say that. So I don't think Arcangues is a D-level horse, but I'm going to say, just for the sake of he's a European grass horse, it's hard to rank his ability on dirt. He's going to be a D horse for me.
Yeah, simple enough. It's just a big question mark. But he definitely had the potential to be like a great dirt horse, but he only really had one shot, but he sure did make it count. Concern. C was for Concern last time out, with the main point being that he was just overshadowed by Holy Bull. What do you think of him?
I mean, that's pretty much what Concern was. He got the benefit of a couple of nice races when obviously Holy Bull didn't show up in the Classic, and you know that pace didn't do anybody any favors, and basically he was just in the best position to win the Breeders' Cup Classic in 1994, given the way that race was going to be run. Certainly not a bad horse. He had so many seconds and thirds, so I'm not going to say he's a bad horse, but just because he never got the job done, except for the one day in the Breeders' Cup Classic, I'm going to say he's a C-tier horse as well. He's better than a lot of other Breeders' Cup Classic winners, but he is, in my opinion, C because of the 2s and the 3s as opposed to the 1s.
And Cigar, right after him. This is another pretty easy choice. S tier is probably going to be the most unchanged group.
Very easy S tier horse. He won 16 races in a row. I also have a very strong appreciation for Cigar because Cigar ran twice in New England. I'm from New England, so Cigar's wins in the Mass Cap are very, very biased opinion, but are my favorite races of his career. And, you know, I mean, there's not really much else to say about him. 16 for 16. He had a lot of crap happening in that Breeders' Cup Classic at Belmont Park between stuff with the starter before the race and with the fact that it was run on a wet surface, and he just overcame that and won the race in a very, very good time as well for the conditions that race was run in.
Yeah, in both videos, Cigar didn't really need a lot of talking about because there was not much else to say. Alphabet Soup, I thought he was a good California horse.
Yeah, Alphabet Soup is a one that's very difficult to rank because he had a very good campaign in the early part of the year, and then had his one blow-up race in the Big Cap where he was 10th, and then going into the Classic he was 2nd, and then he won the Goodwood, which is now the Awesome again. I'm going to call that the Goodwood when horses ran in it and won it when it was the Goodwood. Just for reference, that's what it is now. But he won the Goodwood, was disqualified, and I think that played a factor into why he was as big of a price as he was in the Classic. Also the fact that Cigar was there, Louis Couture's was there. It certainly would not have been an easy race to handicap. But looking at the campaign that he had overall, I mean, I think he's certainly a respectable horse. I respect the ability that he has. I would agree with the last ranking that he's a B horse, but he's a very low B tier horse. I think that there are B tier horses that are better than him, but he is going to be a B tier just because of the amount of consistency that he had early in the season, and then, you know, he really only had his one blow-up start in the Santa Anita Handicap, and there's a lot of in-the-money finishes, but the difference between him and Concern is he got the job done more often than Concern did, and it's a little bit arbitrary, and I understand that you could look at that and say, well, you're being arbitrary with this, but I think he's just a tad better than Concern is.
And then after him, Skip Away.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to hide my bias here because Skip Away is my favorite racehorse of all time, but really, Skip Away was a very, very good horse. He was a champion 3-year-old in 1996 after, you know, having so many things just completely go awry for him so many times, whether it's his 2 very, very tough to watch runner-up finishes in Triple Crown races as a 3-year-old, lost to Travers, but eventually was able to nail that award, and then he got beat a bunch in 1997, which is why he wasn't Horse of the Year then. He should have been Horse of the Year, but because he got beat the amount of times that he did in 1997, that's why he wasn't Horse of the Year. And his Breeders' Cup Classic field is probably the worst field of the Classic in the history of the event, but he won it the way that he would have needed to win it. So I'm not going to say that his Classic is less of an accomplishment. If he had won it by 1 length or 2 lengths, then that would be something that you would take away from him. But I'm going to put him in S tier because of his 1998 season. After he won the Jockey Club Gold Cup in 1997, which I believe is still the track record for that, or the stakes record for that race, at 1.25 miles. He went on a tear, did not lose until the Woodward in 1998, and then unfortunately lost his last 2 races. But if you look at his career from the Jockey Club Gold Cup in 1997 up until the Woodward in 1998, he was the best horse in America.
Yeah, quite a fine specimen. There's a reason why he was only $300,000 away from Cigar without even winning the Dubai World Cup. And then right beside him, now this one was a very close S tier, so we may or may not see him again. Awesome Again.
Yeah, I mean, Awesome Again is another one kind of like Black Tie. He won one Grade 1 and had a lot of good races, but nothing that really made him stand out. Going into 1998's Classic, that's still the best Classic field to date. It's quite obvious when you have the names that were in that race. Silver Charm, Skip Away, a horse who hasn't been running in the biggest races all year, was going to get overlooked. And that's not necessarily fair, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. Awesome Again he's a very tough case because I feel like he should be an S tier horse, but it's very easy to put every horse in S tier. But I'm going to give him the edge just because he was the winner of quite possibly the greatest Breeders' Cup Classic ever and one of the greatest fields ever assembled for racing in North America. So that's going to put him over the top for me. Obviously, his winning streak was great. He beat Silver Charm in that stretch of races and then obviously beat both Silver Charm and Skip Away. You could say he was robbed of Horse of the Year in 1998, and I would say he probably did deserve Horse of the Year in 1998, but I don't really care because Skip Away was robbed of Horse of the Year in 1997, so I'm going to let my bias show through there, but that's beside the point.
It was kind of like Native Dancer, because Native Dancer lost Horse of the Year to Tom Fool, so they just gave it to him as a 4-year-old, but yeah, tit for tat. I do agree Awesome Again does have the edge, because if you're putting the horse winning the greatest running of this race, not an S tier, then there might be something wrong with you. And that doesn't even include, like you mentioned Silver Charm and all that, but that doesn't even include Swain and Victory Gallop, who won the Belmont Stakes over Real Quiet. And that about sums it up. And then we're now down to disappointment with Cat Thief, who I put in C tier last time.
Yeah, and I will stipulate, Cat Thief is a horse that I like. His Breeders' Cup Classic is another one that the race call was really good, so people tend to like the call of the race. And I don't, it's not my favorite, but I understand why people like the race. In terms of the horse, Cat Thief was average. There's not much more you can say about him. He had some really good runs in his career, and he had some really not so good runs in his career. But the Breeders' Cup Classic was, and I a couple weeks ago on Racing Rundown, we did an episode topic of underrated Breeders' Cup winners, and we didn't do any superlatives or anything of these are the top 5 most underrated or anything like that. It was just underrated winners of their race that people don't talk about, and I included Cat Thief in there. And I'm tempted to put Cat Thief in D tier because of his overall career, but what's going to put him in C tier is the way he won his one Classic, because he was very close to the lead in that race, and the horse who was on the lead with him was a horse named Old Trieste, and Old Trieste finished 8th in there. In the stretch, he had to fight off a couple of horses that were, somehow were higher prices than he was, 26-1 for Bud Royale and Golden Missile. You have that trifecta. Can you give me some of that? Because that trifecta paid over $39,000, but that's beside the point. But for me, he's gonna be in C tier just because of the way he won that Classic. And also worth mentioning, the final time was 159.52, so that's another point in his corner. A D tier horse in his career, but he's a C tier Breeders' Cup Classic winner because of the way he won the Classic.
And then we go right back up to like the esteemed champions in Tiznow, who we put in A+, because even in spite of his 2 Breeders' Cup Classic victories, those were, like, just by far his biggest victories. Like, his other big Grade 1 victories, even though the Santa Anita Handicap was very impressive, like, Tiznow didn't win as many Grade 1 races as you would have thought for a 2-time Breeders' Cup Classic winner. He only won 2 other ones.
Yeah, and Tiznow certainly is a very interesting horse to go back and look at because obviously, as Nathan mentioned, two-time Breeders' Cup Classic winner. He's the only horse to date that has done that. You know, there's a lot of really good runs, some seconds. He had a small rivalry with a horse from the 2000 Kentucky Derby who was trained by Bob Baffert, Captain Steve.
Who won the Dubai World Cup.
Captain Steve was a nice horse, but Tiznow I feel like you kind of have to knock him a couple of points because he wasn't really that consistent in 2001. You know, it's been hard to figure out what was wrong with him in his two runs following the Big Cap and before the Breeders' Cup Classic. He lost both the Woodward and the Goodwood. He was third in both those races, and he was upset by a huge long shot.
Freedom Crest.
In the 2001 Goodwood, so that kind of really threw him off going into the Classic. But Tiznow is a horse that everyone loves because of his 2001 Breeders' Cup, and that, honestly, for me, has to be, I don't know if there was ever a more appropriate Breeders' Cup Classic winner, and I talked about this on Racing Rundown. If you're interested, go listen to our Racing Rundown episode from the week of, I believe the episode date is October 28th, and you can hear our full thoughts on that. I'm not going to get into it on here because there's simply not the time, but he's going to be an A-tier horse for me. I thought about putting him in S-tier, but he's going to be an A-tier just because he did lose a little bit more than I believe an S-tier horse should.
Yeah, if there's one race that rivals the 1998 Breeders' Cup Classic, it's the 2001 Breeders' Cup Classic. Just such an emotional event, but not enough. And then we have on the complete opposite side, Volponi, who I think if I have to choose one horse to be the worst Breeders' Cup Classic winner, it would probably be him.
Yeah, and I mean, Volponi doesn't have that bad of a resume if you look at it, but Volponi is just not, when you compare him to all the Breeders' Cup Classic winners that there have been throughout the years, he is absolutely the worst of all of them. So I'm not going to make this longer than it needs to be. He's the first E-tier horse for my list, and I think it's rightfully so.
And it won't be the last. Pleasantly Perfect. This will be the second horse that we bring up doing the Dubai World Cup Breeders' Cup Classic double, started by the one and only Cigar. But is it enough to get him into A tier? Last time we said no, but do things change with Jack?
And he's a very tough horse to look at because he was part of Richard Mandela's Win Everything on the 2003 Breeders' Cup Classic Day. Still one of the most impressive feats in the history of Breeders' Cup. And back at that time, there were only 8 races, so it meant a lot more then to win 4 races. That was winning half the card than it does today when there are 14 races. But in terms of his campaign at the end of 2003 into the early part of 2004, he was very, very good to say the least. Goodwood, Breeders' Cup Classic, and then obviously going into the Dubai World Cup. And then he finished out his career after Dubai, good second in the San Diego, won the Pacific Classic, and then was third, had the very unfortunate honor of having to compete against Ghostzapper, who we'll get to in a minute. I'm going to say, though, that he is a B-tier Classic winner, and I'm going to say that for one reason, and that one reason is he's very lucky that he did not have to face Candy Ride, whose Pacific Classic win in 2003 was a very impressive victory, and I think Candy Ride would have certainly made that 2003 Breeders' Cup a little bit different, and also there was a tad bit of inconsistency. So partially Candy Ride, partially some of the inconsistency of his career, but overall he was a very, very fine racehorse. He's one of the higher end B-tier horses on my list.
This next one, I don't think it's going to change position because none of the S-tier horses I think deserve to change position here. This is another one of those cases where I'm really sad that he was an unsound racehorse. Ghostzapper.
Yeah, I mean, and it's very appropriate to talk about Ghostzapper because Knicks Go, this year's Breeders' Cup Classic winner, is basically Ghostzapper revisited. And, I mean, Ghostzapper is one of the best front-running speed horses that we've ever seen. Few horses rival Ghostzapper in how good they were able to be when they were on the lead. So I'm not going to rehash anything. You just go look at his resume. Lots of ones. He's absolutely an S-tier horse. And, you know, even back when he was a sprinter, he had some very, very incredible races. One of the more underrated horses of all time. It's a good thing that the voters made the right decision in 2004 and gave him Horse of the Year and not a certain other horse.
Yeah, and I mentioned this previous episode, but the other thing that makes him so good is the fact that St. Liam is also really good, but he got defeated by Ghostzapper fair and square.
Yeah, St. Liam's 2005 campaign does not get talked about enough for how good it was in the context of the time. He's a B tier horse in terms of the competition he was running against, but his accomplishments in 2005 were very, very good. Don Handicap, Stephen Foster, which at the time was a grade 1, the Woodward, and then the Breeders' Cup Classic. So those are 4 grade 1 wins. It wasn't the greatest group of horses that he was going up against in 2005. There certainly have been better fields. There have been worse, so it's lower middle tier in terms of if we were to rank the entire fields in the history of the Breeders' Cup Classic. But, he certainly deserves credit in my mind for those wins. His second place finish in the Whitney was a very strong effort, and he had his one blow-up start in the Big Cap in 2005, which it's not the easiest thing sometimes for horses, especially an East Coast horse like him, to ship out to California for those big races. So he is a B-tier horse for me, one of the more middle B-tier horses, but certainly very underrated because you never hear about how good St. Liam's campaign in 2005 was.
It kind of goes to show just how high esteem you have to be to win the Breeders' Cup when such a Horse of the Year like campaign like St. Liam's campaign only can get you B tier. And then speaking of incredible campaigns, Invasor.
Yeah, Invasor is also, he's right on the bubble of A tier into S tier. What he did in the United States, the win streak, very, very strong, only lost 1 race in his career, and that was in Dubai in the UAE Derby. And then you look at what he did subsequently. Pimlico Special, Suburban, Whitney, Breeders' Cup Classic, and then his victory in the Don Handicap was a tremendous victory. He had to overcome so much trouble there.
Yeah, they were not easy races either.
That honestly was one of his best career races. And then rounded out his career. Unfortunately, we did not see more of him after the Dubai World Cup. But
what a way to go out.
It's a tad arbitrary, but I'm going to hold him out of S tier just because I think that the horses that I'm putting in there are the absolute best, and I think he's just a step below the absolute best.
I can't really describe it, but yeah, he just feels just out of it for no particular reason. Curlin, though, is S tier, and he would have gone...
This is an example of one horse that is just superior than them all, and Curlin he's a top 10 racehorse of the 21st century. Nobody's really going to argue with me on that. You look at what he did in his career. This is a horse, remember, Justify was the first horse to win the Kentucky Derby after not having run as a 2-year-old since the early 1880s. And that just puts into perspective how good Justify was. When a horse as good as Curlin couldn't even do it. And Curlin had some trouble in his Kentucky Derby, and was plagued by a little bit of inconsistency in his 3-year-old campaign. But when he was on his game, which was most of the time, Curlin was unbeatable. His victory in the Jockey Club Gold Cup against Lawyer Ron, who was the best older horse that year, spectacular. Breeders' Cup Classic victory was really nice. Went over to Dubai, ran really well there. And then stateside, he lost 2 races, and both of them were turf races. The Stephen Foster was, I believe I already mentioned that, but saying it again, grade 1 win there, grade 1 win in the Woodward, grade 1 win in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. I don't care that he finished second in the Man of War. I mean, that's an accomplishment for me, for a horse who clearly was not a turf horse to get on turf for the first time, run second there. And then I hate talking about Curlin's 2008 Breeders' Cup Classic because it just gets me on the whole topic of how the Breeders' Cup should have never, ever been run on all-weather surface, and it should never be run on an all-weather surface again. That race was completely imbalanced towards the Europeans, and I guess we can get into Ravens Pass at this point. He's going to go in D tier for me. Again, not a horse that I think is D tier level, but because the Breeders' Cup Classic was so slanted in his favor, with it being run on an all-weather surface, he's going to go in D tier for me with his fellow European Arcangues. But so kind of loped 2 together, but Curlin absolutely an S tier, one of the best horses of the 21st century. And because he got to win a slanted Breeders' Cup Classic that was essentially a turf race, Ravens Pass is D tier for me.
And actually, one small thing to mention about Curlin is that I think his second in the Man of War Stakes kind of also shows just how great Secretariat was, because Secretariat practically did the same thing, running on the turf out of nowhere in the same race, the Man of War Stakes. And of course, we all know how well he won the Man of War Stakes, but it of course also shows that even though Curlin is not Secretariat, because no one is Secretariat, Curlin sure did try. And then we continue with the unfortunate synthetic horses with Zenyatta, We put her at A tier, and I don't think that's changing.
Well, this is actually a last minute audible because it is going to change. I'm going to put Zenyatta in S tier because just for a horse to be able to win 19 straight races, it's an accomplishment. And I'm someone who is not the biggest Zenyatta fan in the world, but I have to always respect the fact that she won 19 of 20 in 19 races in a row. So she's going to be S tier for me, and obviously her win in the 2009 Breeders' Cup Classic, extremely memorable, but it was, I will say, it was slanted in her favor and in the favor of Europeans because you had her and a turf horse and a European horse, second and third. But I'm not going to use that to take away from Zenyatta because Zenyatta was able to just win. And, we can talk about who's better than who, her, Rachel Alexandra, other horses. I don't care right now. But Zenyatta was just able to win. And because she was just able to win everything, she's going to be an S tier for me.
Well, almost everything. We have the one and only Blame. And if I say so myself, I think Blame is the perfect name for an upset horse. Like, ever since Upset and Onion, have I not heard a horse with a perfect, spoiler name, like Blame. And Blame was pretty good.
Yeah, Blame was really good in 2010. And Zenyatta's honestly lucky that in the 2010 Jockey Club Gold Cup that Haynesfield decided to pull off a random freak performance and win by 4 lengths there, because if Blame had won the Jockey Club Gold Cup, then it would have been very hard to not give Blame Horse of the Year. I think that Zenyatta still gets it, but worth mentioning, it would have been very hard to not give Blame Horse of the Year with 4 straight Grade 1 wins. But as such, still had the 2 wins before the Jockey Club Gold Cup, and his win in the Breeders' Cup Classic against Zenyatta, you have to give him so much credit there because while Mike Smith screwed the ride up and everything, Blame still had to get the job done. And, you can say all you want. I agree with you. She probably should have won the 2010 Breeders' Cup Classic, but Blame had to do his part to be able to win the race, and you cannot take that away from him. So Blame is a very high A tier horse for me, one of the more underrated Breeders' Cup Classic winners, and a lot of that could be boiled down to people don't like him because he beat a fan favorite horse, and horses that beat fan favorite horses don't tend to be fan favorites.
Yeah, no one likes Upset or Onion or Darren Go. And then, I know this one you really hate, speaking of horses we don't like, Drosselmeyer. Last time he was the other E-tier horse, only better than Volponi when it comes to overall rankings. I think the inspiration to even put him in E-tier was from you, Jack.
Yeah, Drosselmeyer is just not a good horse, and I don't care that he won the Breeders' Cup Classic and the Belmont Stakes. Those wins were just atrocious races. His Belmont Stakes was an awful, awful race. I mean, that is one of the worst Belmont Stakes fields that's been put together in recent memory. I believe his time is the slowest to date in the Belmont Stakes, not counting stuff in the far past, but to date, I believe he does have the slowest time, and that means that there are horses like Commendable and Ruler on Ice, who were very bad horses, but still managed to have better times in their Belmont Stakes than Drosselmeyer did. So I certainly do not like Drosselmeyer as a horse, and I am not going to keep rehashing the same thing. He's a bad horse. He won the Breeders' Cup Classic. I don't know how, because the answer that I always give to that question is Mike Smith witchcraft, and that's honestly probably the best explanation you can give, because Drosselmeyer's not a good horse, but somehow managed to win the Breeders' Cup Classic.
It's ironic that Mike Smith's wizardry brought Drosselmeyer, a nobody, to the winner's circle, but it wasn't enough to get Zenyatta. In fact, it was the reason she lost. Kinda weird how jockeying works. Oh boy, I bet if he had a wish with a genie, he would swap Zenyatta and Drosselmeyer's trips. Like, Drosselmeyer comes late and just misses Game On Dude. No big deal. And Zenyatta goes out a perfect 2020. Sounds like a better future. Also, I checked, I think the first horse to run a race slower than Drosselmeyer was Bounding Home, and also another horse that ran surprisingly slow for the 1.5 miles was Whirlaway, the Triple Crown winner, 2:31, just like Drosselmeyer. I thought that was a fun little tidbit.
And that puts it into perspective because those horses were running in the 1940s.
Yeah, and Whirlaway beats Drosselmeyer any day of the week. Don't get this mixed up. Whirlaway, this isn't even a discussion. I'm not even gonna go any further. It's Whirlaway. Fort Larned. How about him? We put him in C-tier last time.
Fort Larned is a very interesting horse to look at because, he had his Grade 1 before the Breeders' Cup, and wasn't a bad horse in 2012, but also wasn't really that good. You guys are probably right having him as a C tier horse, and I would probably mostly agree with that. I was debating whether or not to put him in D tier just because I'm not a huge fan of his overall campaign, but I'm going to hold off on that, and I'm going to say that he's a C tier horse, but he's definitely one of the lower end C tier horses. And not that he's bad, it's just that there are so many Breeders' Cup Classic winners that are just absolutely better than him that it's hard to compare him because, like I said, he's not a bad horse, but compared to who his other competition are and the other Breeders' Cup Classic winners, he looks like he's a bad horse.
Speaking of that, that's a good transition for Mucho Macho Man. These two had two great battles in the Breeders' Cup Classic. One where Fort Larned won, and one where Mucho Macho Man won. Does Mucho Macho Man sit alongside Fort Larned, just like what we did last video?
Mucho Macho Man is going to be another tough one to rank. I'm probably going to also go with you guys and say he's the C-tier horse. He's a better horse than Fort Larned is, but I don't know if it's by that much. And, you know, his win was a great race, great story for Gary Stevens coming back off of retirement to get the Breeders' Cup Classic win, his first and only career Breeders' Cup Classic win. But ultimately, aside from that and the awesome again, there's really not much else to Mucho Macho Man's career other than that. He did go on and win one of the Millions Classic races in Florida, but aside from that, there's really not a whole ton else to Mucho Macho Man. So he's a good horse, but not that much better than any of the other average Breeders' Cup horses.
Actually, he won the Sunshine Millions twice. That's just a quick little tidbit, but besides that, you're right. And then Bayern, the last of this Santa Anita trilogy. Bayern we put in B tier. Actually, the only reason he wasn't C tier was because of you, honestly, because we discussed this off camera. Does he stay in B tier?
Yeah, Bayern is not a bad horse if you look at his overall resume. And I believe that he had a better resume than the horse that wound up winning the 3-year-old championship, California Chrome. I don't argue that he should have won Horse of the Year because that's too controversial to say. That's why I always defer to main sequence if we're talking about Horse of the Year in 2014. But Bayern doesn't get enough credit for the campaign that he had in 2014. And it's because of what happened at the gate in the Breeders' Cup Classic really left a bad taste in people's mouths. And I understand that because people like Shared Belief, and Shared Belief got roughed at the gate, but it's horse racing. We have to remember that we give horses an allowance at the start of a race, and that's why he wasn't taken down. In terms of his resume from 2014, you know, if his resume were to be run by a horse today, that would be 4 Grade 1 wins, because at the time the Pennsylvania Derby and the Woody Stevens were still Grade 2 races. So if you were to run this campaign today, that's 4 Grade 1s, which is certainly a very impressive campaign. So that's why he would be ranked higher than C tier for me. The difficult thing is, and I feel like he has the talent to be an A tier horse, the difficult thing is when he didn't get the lead in races, that's when he really suffered. And that's what's going to hold him out of A tier for me, because I think on his best day, Bayern is an A tier horse. But unfortunately, Bayern has too many races where stuff didn't go right for him, and he had atrocious finishes. Preakness 9, Travers 10. That's really as far as you need to look for those atrocious races. So I think he's an A tier on his best day, but I'm not ranking horses based on them on their best day. I'm ranking them based on them overall as a career, and Bayern is a B tier horse if we're looking at it from that perspective.
Master of consistency, with lots of sarcasm. Yeah, like there are definitely a lot of other frontrunners you can make this argument for that they need the lead in order to win, such as, say, Knicks Go, who also won the Breeders' Cup, but I think Bayern's the most extreme example of all or nothing. He just was, yeah, you either got Bayern or you got not Bayern. Then we got a bit more of a consistent Bob Baffert horse, American Pharoah, who I don't think I'm going to get any protest for keeping him in S tier.
Absolutely. I mean, American Pharoah ended the drought for the Triple Crown. There's really not much else you need to say. Triple Crown winner, Breeders' Cup Classic winner, only horse to date that has done that. Obviously, he was the only Triple Crown winner that had the opportunity to do that, but still, only horse to date that has done that. Not much more you can say about him other than he's one of the best horses of the 21st century and thankfully ended that damn Triple Crown drought.
Yeah, I was just waiting for that to happen. I think some may argue he is the best 21st century horse, but that's a topic for another day. And then the Baffert trilogy just does not end here. We have Arrogate, who I think has a similar complex to Bayern, in that on his best day, he could have been S tier, not just A tier, he could have been S tier. But unfortunately, even though Arrogate wasn't an all-or-nothing frontrunner, I know, how long has it been since we've seen a Baffer horse not go to the lead? But it's still the same case of just an all-or-nothing horse. He was amazing at his best, but at his worst, he was just mediocre.
Yeah, and that's the real trouble with ranking Arrogate. His stretch of 4 races, from the Travers to the Dubai World Cup, is as good a stretch as you're ever going to see from a racehorse. And I'm not sure that many people would dispute you on that. And before that, his races in California and Maiden and Allowance Company were, he was an ordinary horse, went out to Saratoga, freaked that one day. And it's always interesting to me because everyone was talking about the Baffert trained American Freedom in that race. I distinctly remember that. That's one of my early racing memories to get to a personal side of things, but then went on that massive stretch of Travers, Breeders' Cup Classic, Pegasus World Cup, ended it in the Dubai World Cup, which is one of the single most impressive races by any horse. And then when it seemed like it could only go up from there, it actually went down, and he did not win for the rest of his career. And that's what pulls him down from S tier. I really want to put him in S tier, but I just can't put him in S tier because of the stretch of races after the Dubai World Cup. If we were ranking horses based on them at their peak, he would be an S tier and Bayern would be an A tier. But I'm ranking this based on horses as a whole, and I elevated Skip away to S tier because of his 1998 campaign, and I'm going to pull down Bayern because of his 2017 campaign. So he's an A tier horse.
You mean Arrogate?
Arrogate. He's a very high A tier horse, but still an A tier horse.
Yes. And then, finally, the streak ends with Gunrunner, the horse that, at his best, was inferior to Arrogate, but eventually took over when Arrogate was not at the top. I think it's only fair to put Gunrunner alongside Arrogate, because he's better than Arrogate post-Dubai World Cup, but definitely not when it comes to peak Arrogate, so just take that for what you will.
Yeah, you have to rank these two aside each other. And Gunrunner's campaign, as a 4-year-old, was a very, very strong campaign. After he came back from Dubai, won 5 straight races, went on to be Horse of the Year, and ended his career winning the Pegasus World Cup back when that race used to be $16 million, and ended up raking in a very fine chunk of change for himself. Not really much else to say about him other than, he was pretty good in the early part of his 3-year-old campaign. Always looked like he had the consistency, and finally was able to break through and show that toward the end of his 4-year-old campaign and his one race as a 5-year-old.
Your co-host Eric Dico will probably defend that horse till the day he dies for the fact that he was his first fan.
Oh, if he was here, he'd be S tier above everybody.
Yeah, he would vouch for that. He'll probably tell you that later when you say you've done this. Accelerate. Probably one of the first examples of not a Sadler special, as you have taught me. 5 grade 1s, if it weren't for Justify, he would have been Horse of the Year almost any other year.
And he had the very unfortunate situation of falling in the year that Justify won the Triple Crown. Accelerate's a very difficult horse to rank because, and I've said this about a lot of horses, but the handicap division in 2018 was really just him winning everything out on the West Coast.
Except for City of Light. City of Light was the only horse that could beat him.
And that was in one instance, and Accelerate beat him in subsequent races. And
he did lose his last race. City of Light did beat him in his final race, the Pegasus.
I enjoyed the campaign that Accelerate went on as a 5-year-old, and he was very, very consistent. Consistency is something that I absolutely value in horses. You cannot argue with the 5 grade 1s that he had en route to a Breeders' Cup Classic. But this is a very, very consistent horse. But the problem is that I think that there are better horses than him. So he's going to be a B tier horse. He's certainly not bad, but he's a B tier horse for me just because there are better Breeders' Cup Classic winners than him. And that's kind of an arbitrary thing to throw out. When you're doing lists like this, sometimes you have to be arbitrary, and this is one of the instances where I'm going to have to be probably unfairly arbitrary, but still arbitrary.
Yeah, it's just a good case. I mean, you can always argue about his 5 grade 1 races, but then you keep into account horses like Invasor, Arrogate, Gunrunner, and then you just realize that as amazing as Accelerate is, the Breeders' Cup is the Breeders' Cup. And then we have Vino Rosso. He was C tier. He had his moments, but I think he's honestly one of the lesser Breeders' Cup Classic winners we've had in the last 10 years.
Certainly. I mean, he was in a very weak Breeders' Cup Classic field when the second place horse in that Classic wanted no part of 1.25 miles, and that really just puts into perspective how weak that group was. You look at what some of the horses that were in there subsequently came back to do. Grade 1 winners like Math Wizard and Code of Honor. Math Wizard was never good, and I'm not putting them in the same sentence, but Code of Honor never ended up being the horse that we thought he would be. War of Will was a turf horse, and again, McKinsey didn't want 1.25 miles. Higher Power is typical Sadler Special horse of win 1, grade 1, never run back to that form again. And Vino Rosso just kind of got the benefit of a very weak crop. He was able to get the win, and you know, I would agree with you guys. He's a C-tier horse, and he's probably on the lower end of C-tier. He probably would have been a very good 5-year-old had he stayed around in 2020, but unfortunately did not do that, and so his ranking is going to suffer because he really wasn't that good.
Like, even without the massive tragedy that race was, it was just forgettable. I barely remember anyone.
If you were to look at that race, it's not going to be one of the more well-remembered Breeders' Cup Classics.
I mean, even when you do remember it, you just remember how bad it was for racing. But moving on, we have back to Baffert. Authentic, I believe we put in lower A tier last time. Actually, no, around B tier. He was B tier. Does he get up to the A, or does he stay in B?
He's going to be a B tier for me just because it's really hard to compare him to the other horses because he had such an a-traditional year. He won a September Kentucky Derby and ran second in an October Preakness. All that was caused because of COVID. And it's not necessarily fair to him, I don't think, to rank him based on the way COVID affected his career, but that's the way I'm going to do it because that's the way it happened. COVID wasn't fair to a lot of things, and Authentic is certainly going to be among the group that was affected negatively by COVID. Obviously, not negatively for him because he wound up winning the Kentucky Derby and the Breeders' Cup Classic as a direct result of COVID. I think if we run the Derby in May, this horse does not come anywhere near the winner's circle in May, and, you know, everything else is hypotheticals from there, but he's going to lose points for me just because his Derby was not a May Derby.
And lastly, this one's going to be a bit difficult because he's still technically active. Knicks Go. Now, the way I'll just do this is we'll just rank the current version of him, like what we know so far, which is practically about like 90% of his career, since I think his last race will be the Pegasus. Don't quote me on that. Where would you put him with all that we currently know, and take it with a slight grain of salt?
Yeah, I mean, I would put him as a B-tier horse because the formula with Knicks Go is just put him on the lead. And that's why this horse went from being extremely inconsistent and can't win anything as a 3-year-old to all of a sudden now he's Horse of the Year, 2-time Breeders' Cup winner, Knicks Go. That's what putting a horse in their best running style and putting them in the best position to win races can do for you. It can turn a very average horse into a Horse of the Year, 2-time Breeders' Cup winner. So he's a B-tier horse just because I think that there are better horses than him, but he's certainly not a bad horse. Once again, it's very tough to rank Breeders' Cup Classic horses because there are so many really good horses and there are so many that are so close to each other, and you got to kind of be arbitrary at some points. And this is going to be a little arbitrary, but he's going to end my tier list in B.
I think Knicks Go is kind of a good amalgamation of Accelerate and Bayern. He has the running style and the unpredictability of Bayern, but he has the end-of-year career of Accelerate, being a horse that came around and got better with every year he raced. And that, I think, is a sound conclusion here. This one is definitely going to be a lot longer than the one with Sammy Roseman, because let me tell you, Jack has a lot of things to say, and that's why I thought it was great to give this another go, because it's great to see unique perspectives on this simple idea, ranking every Breeders' Cup Classic winner. And while the rankings did say generally the same, there were quite a few differences, such as not featuring St. Liam in A tier, and dropping down a few other horses, such as Ferdinand most specifically. And big shout out to Racing Rundown. Make sure to give him a follow on both YouTube and also to listen to his podcasts. And thank you for coming along and giving us another look at this tier list.
Certainly, glad to do it.
And that'll conclude this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Comment down if you want other types of races to be ranked in this sort of manner, or just other racing videos that you may want to see featuring other horse racing YouTubers, because I do want to keep up this sort of collaborative thing with my YouTube videos. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm Nathan from Sketchy the Horse Guy, and
I'm Jack Sargent from Racing Rundown.
ciao, y'all.